Locked On Grizzlies podcast. While the hope going into Thursday was that the Grizzlies would be able to perhaps punch their ticket into the Summer League title game, they unfortunately ran into a bit of trouble that did not allow for them to be able to get the job done. On the struggles of the Grizzlies against the Celtics, some overall takeaways from the most intriguing talents from the Vegas Summer League, that and much more on this edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Here we go.
Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome one and all to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. Hope wherever you are and wherever you are listening, you're having a fantastic start to not only your Friday, but also your weekend as well. Co-host Michael Cole will be back with me. He's actually, I believe, traveling home either today or this weekend from Summer League, but he will be back with me next week giving his thoughts on Summer League and obviously looking out towards, now what is truly starting the NBA offseason. Of course, you can find myself at StatsSAC on Twitter, Michael Cole at DeMichael C. The show at Locked On Grizz, we're available right here on YouTube. Now over 1,000 subscribers. Thank you so much. Just make sure you hit that subscribe button. Lets us know you enjoyed the show. Lets others find the show as well. And of course, we're free on all podcast platforms. Wherever you enjoy listening, to podcasts, make Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. So a 108-91 loss to the Boston Celtics yesterday by the Grizzlies basically wraps up their Summer League in terms of anything of significance. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't mean that as insulting or any type of negativity towards the Grizzlies roster. They still do have one game left, as all NBA teams will have. The Grizzlies have one game left tomorrow on Saturday at 5 o'clock local time against the Spurs. But the reason that I say that it's of significance is because in all likelihood, any player that, potentially, is either on the Grizzlies roster, has a chance to make the Grizzlies roster, they probably won't play. Maybe you see a Kenneth Lofton, maybe you see a Kennedy Chandler, but, I don't expect Zaire Williams or Xavier or Santi Aldama to play. I don't think that you'll get extended playing time for Roddy or Jake Laravia, or David Roddy or Jake Laravia. Maybe you do. We'll talk about that in a few moments. But the point that I'm getting at is that I think it's fair to go ahead and provide instant takeaways from yesterday in the Summer League in general. And yesterday, what simply was the case was the fact that, the Grizzlies did not get off to the start that they needed to. And what we've seen so far in Summer League through the 7 games that the Grizzlies has played is that if they're not getting off to a hot offensive start, they're going to struggle because they absolutely were abysmal in Vegas when it came to shooting the three. More on that a little bit later on in the show. But last night, the Grizzlies just never really got to a rhythm. Zaire Williams, it was great to see him likely end his Summer League on a positive note when it comes to scoring. We've seen incremental improvements, especially on Tuesday with how well he played all around. Incremental improvements in his overall passing, playmaking, facilitating, rebounding, defending. All those things showed great promise from Summer League, and it was great to see him continue to improve in those areas. Yesterday, he took on a bit of the scoring load. 8 of 16, 21 points, did have 8 turnovers, still had 7 rebounds. But the point is this. With Kyle Anderson now in Minnesota, if the focus for the Grizzlies was to have Zaire Williams show enough that he could step into that super reserve, spot starter type role for the Grizzlies, potentially he's a starter while Jaren Jackson Jr. is out. If the Grizzlies are looking for Zaire Williams to take on, probably a 20 to 25 minute a night role for this team to start off the season, I think he has shown, at least to the level that they were hoping, or maybe even better than they were hoping, when it comes to his overall ability. The shot you obviously want to see continue, especially from distance, to become more consistent as it was towards the end of last year. But my takeaway from Zaire Williams is that we've seen what we needed to see. I'm not necessarily saying you should have all the confidence in the world. You're going to see a Desmond Bane type breakout. I don't think that's going to occur, but I do think that you're going to continue to see Zaire Williams improve, and we saw a lot of improvement in Summer League. Santi Aldama, 3 of 6 last night from the field, had 10 points. He wasn't his same scoring, source that he had been. I do think that that's one thing that hurt the Grizzlies. This Grizzlies summer roster seemed to really need to have a central scoring figure to rely on at times for the offense to go good. Aldama had been that on Sunday. He had been that on Tuesday. Was not necessarily that last night, though he did contribute with some rebounds, and some overall, ability as well. Great to see his overall defensive ability. But if there is an MVP of the Summer League, for me, it's Santi Aldama. Not only in terms of the stats that he produced, but also in terms of if there was a player who needed a staple performance, who needed a noteworthy performance in Summer League to really make his mark as an intriguing part of the roster, it was Santi Aldama, and he did exactly that. The overall scoring prowess was great to see. When Santi Aldama should have taken over, should have shown that he was one of the better, if not best talents on the court against the teams that the Grizzlies played, that's exactly what he showed. And he also showed some key abilities when it came to defensive playmaking. He showed better than expected awareness when it came to creating steals, creating blocks. We know that he can provide some rebounding support. But with Jaren Jackson Jr. out, Santi Aldama's performance has made me want to see him be a part of the rotation. Made me want to see him potentially get 10 to 15 minutes a night. It's made me want to see him be someone that the Grizzlies give opportunity on offense, especially when bench units are playing against each other in games during the regular season. There's plenty to work with when it comes to Santi Aldama. The Summer League showed that. Now, if the shot can consistently fall, there were times where it struggled in the Summer League. If the shot can consistently fall, especially with Santi Aldama potentially being a corner three option that we know Taylor Jenkins prefers from his front court players, that will be an exciting development. So I think there's plenty that Santi Aldama has provided to build on. And from there, I think there's going to be plenty of opportunity for him to make the most of an increased opportunity with Jaren Jackson out and with others now in new places. And of course, the rookies as well. Kenneth Lofton was an absolute stud at times for the Grizzlies, showing a better than expected feel for the game, showing a confidence level in his game of knowing that he can compete with other talents and that will get the ball and he will do some damage when it comes to scoring, rebounding, show better passing prowess as well. David Roddy, we saw, many talked about the fact that David Roddy's offensive resourcefulness was a bit deeper than many gave him credit for. We saw that ability, especially when it came to finding his shot near the rim, the fadeaways, the dunks on the fast break. It was great to see him. The three-point shot will come, but overall, there's some pretty good resourcefulness in David Roddy's game. Vince Williams, good defensive upside, good shooter. Not necessarily saying he's going to get all that much opportunity this year, but he could be one of the more intriguing talents to find at South Haven and really be able to continue to develop his game in the Grizzlies system. But another really fun piece of this Grizzlies roster has been Kennedy Chandler. Now, overall, Kennedy Chandler's performance was as expected. He did a very good job when it came to his defensive production. He did a very good job when it came to facilitation and playmaking. That part of his game continued to improve as the Summer League progressed. Overall, his scoring efficiency, his shooting, that obviously is a work in progress, but that was known. But the defensive impact, and to not be too high, not be, too dramatic, a defensive impact that, is to the level of DeAnthony Melton in terms of Kennedy Chandler's ability to create steals, fast break opportunities, and big points that can change the momentum of the game. You saw some flashes of that. You saw some consistent flashes of defensive playmaking. Kennedy Chandler can create plenty of chaos when he's on the court on the defensive end, and with his ability and his quickness to get out on the fast break, that could be a great weapon for the Grizzlies as the years progress. So it was great to see Kennedy Chandler make the impact that he did as well on the court. But one of the names that many Grizzlies fans were hoping to see more of in terms of his overall production was Jake Laravia. While, yes, it's less than ideal that Laravia did not perform to the level that many of us had hoped, I don't necessarily think that should significantly change the opinion of what to expect for him this year. We'll discuss that in just a moment. Before we do, I want to talk with you a bit more about BetOnline, the title sponsor for today's show. BetOnline, you hear us talk about it all the time. When you want to bet wager on sports, the one thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to deal with the hassle of setting up your bets, setting up what you want to bet and wager on. You want to be able to do that once, have it taken care of for you when you go forward, and that's exactly what BetOnline can do, so you can then focus on what can make you money when it comes to stats, data, what have you. Mobile device, laptop, whatever you choose to use, that's where BetOnline will be. Make sure you choose betonline.net the next time you want to bet and wager on all the sports you love. Can't thank you enough for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. But of course, we want to remind you, check out the Locked On NBA podcast. Now that the Summer League is wrapping up, Still so many trades out there. The DeAndre Ayton news for over the past few days. What's going to happen with Donovan Mitchell? What's going to happen with Kevin Durant? What's the fallout around the league from those potential moves? Kyrie Irving as well. Check out the Locked On NBA podcast as your second listen of the day after Locked On Grizzlies. So plenty of positives to take away from the Summer League. Some negatives as well. Grizzlies struggled to shoot the three. Grizzlies, had some offensive struggles. In terms of general defense, there were times where the Grizzlies struggled as well. But perhaps one of the bigger individual narratives from the Vegas Summer League especially is the performance of Jake Laravia. Overall, Jake Laravia, only 14 shots in Las Vegas. He was 4 of 14, I believe 2 of 8 or 9 from 3. But the thing that, is less than ideal, and I'll even go to the point of saying is a bit concerning, is the fact that we saw his shot totals go from 4 in the first game to 5 in the second to 3 in the third to 2 in the fourth game. Jake Laravia did not get off more than 5 shots in any of the games in the Summer League. And yes, that is a bit of a concern. This is the type of setting where you want to see players like Jake Laravia have success, especially with what the Grizzlies invested in him when it came to the first round pick. Now, I'll go ahead and put this out there. It's less than ideal to see this type of development in Summer League. However, I want to caution anyone from having this make a big impact of your overall assessment of Jake Laravia moving forward. I understand that this is really the only thing that we've seen from Laravia so far. This is our first impression. So it's going to have a big impact on our opinion right now. But I don't necessarily think that it's any type of indication that, Jake Laravia is already a bust or he's going to struggle or what have you. He may. He may not have, even, the type of role that Zaire Williams or the type of impact that Zaire Williams had last year. However, I do think that there are also a few things to keep in mind when it comes to Jake Laravia and the fact that, yes, he definitely did not take the attempts. Yes, there certainly seems to be a hesitancy, a reluctance for him to take the shots that the Grizzlies want him to take. But here are a few things that I think should allow for us to remain confident in the Grizzlies' investment in Laravia, and that in time, he's going to be the player that many of us hope he will be. For one, it's the simple fact that the Grizzlies now know what they need to work on. They know that when it comes to Jake Laravia, they need to work with him on his ability, on his approach, and, his confidence when it comes to his shooting. I won't necessarily go as far as confidence. His awareness, if you will, of knowing when to shoot, knowing that when you have the opportunity and with the ability that we know you have, we selected you because we want for you to use your smarts when it comes to shooting. We want you to take advantage of that as much as possible. We want you to shoot the ball. If there's one positive from, what many may consider a negative, is that the Grizzlies now know what they need to work on with Jake Laravia, his shot approach and his shot awareness. Well, here's the thing. The second positive thing, besides having a clear indication of what they need to work on with Laravia, is we know that this is one strength of Taylor Jenkins and his staff. There have been so many success stories. DeAnthony Melton, Tyus Jones, Desmond Bane, Kyle Anderson, Jaren Jackson Jr. earlier in his career, John Morant's improvement. If there's one area that Taylor Jenkins and his staff have multiple success stories on, it's the overall ability to work with players on their shooting approach and confidence, to become more confident, to put more emphasis on taking shots when it's there. We talked about it last year. Taylor Jenkins' moniker, let that MFer fly. Taylor Jenkins is going to put an emphasis on if you have the ability to take a good shot from distance, you better darn well take it. And that is exactly the type of mentality that needs to be, applied to Jake Laravia. So the point is that the Grizzlies are going to be able to work with Laravia when it comes to his overall approach to being able to improve his shot. And I'm not saying that he's instantly going to become someone that's going to shoot 4 or 5 threes a game and he's going to instantly be someone that has, 40% shooting. I don't expect for Jake Laravia to have the type of rookie season that Desmond Bane has. I think that that's a bit unfair to Laravia. But I do think that if there is one development track in the NBA, not saying the Grizzlies are the best, overall three-point shooting team in the NBA. They're obviously not. But my point is that we know Taylor Jenkins' mentality when it comes to shooting from distance. We know the emphasis that he places on if the shot is there, take it. And we know the success that he has had in instilling that confidence, instilling that mentality in other players. I feel very confident he'll be able to do the same when it comes to Jake Laravia. And here's the other thing that I'll say is this, is that I know that Summer League is a place where a lot of times it's more conducive. If you are a shot creator, or if you're someone who is confident in your ability to create shooting volume, you're probably going to shine more in a summer league type setting than a player like Laravia, who may not necessarily put that much emphasis on shooting. He puts more emphasis on the overall ability to add value, in all facets of the game. And that's perfectly fine. I think one of the things that probably did impact Laravia's overall ability to shoot is that the three-point shot just clearly was not an asset for the Grizzlies. We saw it on Sunday. We saw it last night or yesterday when they went 3 of 20 from the field. The Grizzlies shifted more towards going into the lane, finding shots close to the basket, emphasizing good looks inside the arc. Jake Laravia's game is not as advanced in that area as a David Roddy's or even a Santi Aldama's or Kennedy Chandler's. That's a part of Laravia's game that needs to develop in time, just because, to be honest with you, he's not necessarily as athletic as those other players, and his focus is more on the perimeter as a spot-up shooter. So that's one other reason as to why Laravia's approach may not have necessarily been where many of us had hoped, is because the overall team focus shifted away from Laravia's strengths. But I will say this, going into the season, I do feel more comfortable with a player like Laravia, who, what we've seen of his shot, we feel confident it's going to translate to the NBA. Very smooth approach, good decision-making on when he takes a shot. It typically is a good look. And overall, it seems like he has good form that will translate to the NBA as a reliable three-point shooter. I'd rather have a player that you're confident in his ability to make the shot, but overall he needs to work on his willingness to take it, than a player who is overconfident in his shot and is willing to take it at any point in time, despite how bad of a look it may be, and he's not that accurate going in. This isn't a shot towards Dillon Brooks, but, Dillon Brooks, we've seen examples of that. That's frustrated, the fans and probably the franchise in the past. So even though Laravia needs to improve his willingness to take shots more often, I do feel confident that there's plenty there to work with that can make him a reliable three-point shooter in time. And I also feel that he's in a great situation when it comes to Taylor Jenkins and his staff. The past success we've seen him have with other players improving their willingness and confidence in their shots, I think he can work that magic once again with Laravia. And once he does work his magic with Laravia, you may have higher potential in Laravia than you do those other players, and you turn Laravia into the reliable three-point threat the Grizzlies hope that he is at the 3 and 4 spot in the future. But what does the Summer League overall tell us about some individual players going into the season? And what potentially does it tell us about, hey, are the Grizzlies done making moves? We'll discuss that in just a moment. The primary focus, though, for Memphis going into this season is that, guys, we're setting up just like we did last year. And I'm not to the point of saying that because the Grizzlies bet on their youth last year, that should absolutely mean no one should have questions of them betting on youth again. And that, once again, they're going to be one of the best teams in the NBA with the current roster that they've assembled. I don't feel confident in saying that, because this roster is not better than it was at this point last year due to the fact that it's without Jaren Jackson Jr. That's not in any way, shape, or form insulting the Grizzlies' approach or insulting players on the roster. It's complimenting the impact that Jaren Jackson Jr. made last year. The Grizzlies are likely going to be less effective at times on defense, and they're also going to miss Jaren Jackson Jr.'s three-point production. They're going to miss DeAnthony Melton's three-point production. They're going to miss Kyle Anderson's leadership and overall defensive ability. I still think that this Grizzlies team has more than enough talent to be able to, play winning basketball and still be in the mix, for in the playoff hunt until Jackson Jr. comes back if they decide to stand pat. But the thing that I'll say is this: I am perfectly fine with the Grizzlies investing in youth as they have. Perhaps maybe they should have mixed it up a bit more. Would I feel any different if they had decided to keep DeAnthony Melton instead of trading him for Danny Green and David Roddy? Probably not. I'd still be very excited to have DeAnthony Melton, especially with him potentially taking on a bigger role with Kyle Anderson and others being gone. But my point is that I'm perfectly fine with the Grizzlies once again doubling down on their youth. It worked last year, even if I don't expect for it to work this year if they decide to do it again. It may not necessarily work to the level this year that it did last year. If we take a bit of a step back, I'm fine with that as well. The Grizzlies are looking at the long term, and they're continuing to overall develop the final version of their roster. But I do think that the Grizzlies, a very smart move for them would be to bring in another veteran talent that can shoot. I definitely do think that that is a right move. And I think that there are plenty of indicators, signs, what have you, that should be a move that the Grizzlies should make. Because if you were to start with Jaren Jackson Jr. out, if you were to start Ja Bain, Dylan, we'll say Brandon Clark, and Steven Adams, that starting lineup, I think, is fine. I think that's a very competitive starting lineup, even without Jaren Jackson Jr. But that leaves your bench lineup as being Tyus Jones, John Conchar, Zaire Williams, Santi, Aldama, David Roddy, Jake Laravia, one of those three, and then Xavier Tillman as being, basically your first four guys would be Tyus, Ziaire, Conchar, and Tillman. Still a pretty productive bench. But overall, when you look at that lineup, when you look at that roster, in my opinion, you've got two reliable shooters. You've got Bain, who's one of the best shooters in the NBA, and you've got Tyus Jones, who's shown a definite ability to be an impactful shooter at times. If John Conchar is able to translate his shooting that he's shown so far in his career once again to a higher level of volume, that's an unbelievable development. If Zaire Williams is shooting like he did at the end of last year, that's an unbelievable development. If Dylan Brooks can take on more of a role as the defensive leader and three-point resource on offense, and I think he has the capability of doing that. If he takes on that ability, that's a great development. But again, that's a lot of things to rely on where ifs play a big part in it happening. As a result, I do think that there is plenty of reason for the Grizzlies potentially to use, the Danny Green contract and maybe, a Tillman or a Tilly or what have you, to go out and look for another veteran type shooter. For instance, I mentioned that Utah has Jordan Clarkson and Malik Beasley. Jordan Clarkson, both of those players are under contract next year. And then in the 23-24 season, I believe that Jordan Clarkson has a player option for the second year of his contract, while Malik Beasley has a club option. I may have gotten those mixed up, but it's 1 year plus an option. One of those two shooters, I think the Grizzlies can put together a package that makes sense with Danny Green as, being the salary match, maybe throw in some incentive when it comes to picks, trade that and make an offer to Utah for one of those players and bring those players in. I understand that both those players may not necessarily be what the Grizzlies are looking for, but I do think that type of addition makes sense for this franchise. I think that type of source of volume three-point shooting mixed with the overall tutelage that Taylor Jenkins and his staff can offer, I think you can get some good value out of that type of addition. Maybe a Terrence Ross from the Orlando Magic could potentially make sense as well. I think that type of addition makes sense for Memphis. It's not necessarily the type of move that they made in the past. It's not necessarily the type of player that really fits their mold, and I do get that. But I do think that type of addition to this team really could make sense, especially when you consider the fact that with DeAnthony Melton in Philadelphia and Jaren Jackson Jr. on the injured list probably until 2023, your ability to shoot the threes is probably going to be hard to come by. It's probably going to be hard to rely on it to remain consistent, especially with how the Grizzlies were shooting towards the end of last year and in the playoffs. Their ability to replicate that success, when they had success in the playoffs, when they had success toward the ends of the year, I don't necessarily know if there's that much confidence that they'll be able to repeat that. And I definitely know that from what we saw in Summer League, there's probably not a lot of confidence there to do that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I really would love to see significant improvements in the shooting ability of Ziaire and Santi Aldama. John Conchar remained productive from three at higher volume as he has so far in his career, and Dylan to take on more of a role as a three-point shooter. I would love to see that. And if that occurs, then hey, the Grizzlies have their problem solved. But I think that you can hope for that to occur and kind of land in the middle where some of that happens, where some of it doesn't, but still also bring in a player who really, especially off the bench, can be a great source of three-point shooting. I think the Grizzlies have enough offensive firepower and defensive depth overall to bring in a player whose primary strength is shooting, even though they may not be able to provide a lot of value elsewhere. So that's my opinion. I think that the Grizzlies do need that type of infusion of three-point shooting, especially until Jaren comes back. And then, hey, at that point, you may have a better three-point approach than you've had at any time during Taylor Jenkins' tenure. And now you've got a team that can offer up that three-point production more consistently that we know they're going to need in the playoffs from, how important it was to them being competitive with the Warriors in the second round of the playoffs last year. So a move may or may not happen. And if it doesn't, there's still plenty of reason to have faith in what the Grizzlies currently have on their roster. But I also think that the performance of the Summer League team overall, it probably does bring to light a need to add another veteran source of scoring/shooting, or just in general, another veteran-type presence, especially at the wing position, that the Grizzlies can especially bring off the bench and rely on to make good plays, rely on to potentially be a good source of shooting success. I think that'd be a great addition for this team. Whether or not it happens, fine either way. But I do think that there continues to be growing indicators that that type of addition to this roster would definitely be beneficial, especially without Jaren Jackson's three-point shooting ability available to this roster. Can't thank you enough for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. Hope you have a great start to your Friday and a great start to your weekend. Make sure to check out some of the younger talents who are fighting for, hustle play or hustle rotation spots, G League roster spots, potentially some fun names that are towards the bottom of that Summer League roster, though some of the main names may not be playing. There's still plenty of names to watch. Make sure you check out the Grizzlies game against the Spurs tomorrow as they close out the 2022 Summer League. Until next time, my name's Shawn Coleman. Hope you have a great day. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast.